Hey there, philosophy time. Today I'm going to be reading from Joyful Wisdom by Mingyur Rinpoche. This is from chapter 4, The Turning Point. Buddha Nature. It isn't as if Buddha was holding back on some great revelation that would only be passed on to the best and brightest of his students. Rather, like a responsible teacher, he focused first of all on teaching's basic principles before moving on to more advanced subjects. Ask any elementary teacher about the practicality of teaching calculus to children who haven't yet mastered the basic addition, subtraction, division, or multiplication. The subject is Buddha nature, which doesn't refer to the behavior or attitude of someone who walks around in colored robes begging for food. Buddha is a Sanskrit term that might be roughly translated to one who is awake. A formal title, it usually refers to Siddhartha Gautama, the young man who achieved enlightenment 2,500 years ago in Bodh Gaya. Buddha nature, however, is not a formal title. It's not a characteristic exclusive to the historical Buddha or to Buddhist practitioners. It's not something created or imagined. It is the heart or essence inherent in all living beings, an unlimited potential to do, see, hear, or experience anything. Because of Buddha nature, we can learn, we can grow, we can change. We can become Buddhas in our own right. Buddha nature can't be described in terms of relative concepts. It has to be experienced directly, and direct experience is impossible to define in words. Imagine looking at a place so vast that it surpasses our ability to describe it. The Grand Canyon, for example. You could say that it's big, that the stone walls on either side are sort of red, and that the air is dry and smells faintly of cedar. But no matter how well you describe it, your description can't be really encompassing the experience of being in the presence of something so vast. Or you could try describing the view from the observatory at Taipei 101, one of the world's tallest buildings, hailed as one of the 7 wonders of the modern world. You could talk about the panorama, the way the cars and the people look like ants, or your own breathlessness at standing so high above the ground. But it still couldn't communicate the depth and breadth of your experience. Though Buddha nature defies description, the Buddha did provide some clues in the way of signposts or maps that can help direct us towards that supremely inexpressible experience. One of the ways in which he described it was in terms of 3 qualities: boundless wisdom, which is the capacity to know anything and everything, past, present, and future; infinite capability, which consists of an unlimited power to raise ourselves and other beings from any condition of suffering; and immeasurable loving kindness and compassion, a limitless sense related to all creatures, and open-heartedness towards others that serves as a motivation to create the conditions that enable all beings to flourish. Undoubtedly, there are many people who fervently believe the Buddha's description and the possibility that, through study and practice, they can realize a direct experience of unlimited wisdom, capability, and compassion. There are probably many others who think that it's a bunch of nonsense. Oddly enough, in many of the sutras, the Buddha seems to have enjoyed engaging in conversation with the people who doubted what he had to say. He was, after all, one of many teachers traveling across India in the 4th century BCE, a situation similar to the ones in which we find ourselves at present, in which radio, TV, and the internet are flooded by teachers and teachings of various persuasions. Unlike many of his contemporaries, however, the Buddha didn't try to convince people that the method through which he found release from suffering was the only true method. A common theme running through many of the sutras could be summarized in modern terms as, "This is just what I did, and this is what I recognized. Don't believe anything I say, try it for yourself." He didn't actively discourage people from considering what he learned and how he learned it. Rather, in his teachings on Buddha nature, he presented his listeners with a kind of thought experiment, inviting them to discover within their own experience the ways in which aspects of Buddha nature emerge from time to time in our daily lives. He presented this experiment in terms of an analogy of a house in which a lamp has been lit and the shades and shutters have been drawn. The house represents the seemingly solid perspective of physical, mental, emotional conditioning. The lamp represents our Buddha nature. No matter how tightly the shades and shutters are drawn, inevitably a bit of light from inside the house shines through. Inside, the light from the lamp provides the clarity to distinguish between, say, a chair, a bed, or a carpet. As it peeks through the shades or the shutters, we may experience the light of wisdom sometimes as intuition, what some people describe as a gut-level feeling about a person, situation, or event. Loving kindness and compassion shines through the shutters in these moments when we spontaneously give aid or comfort to someone, not out of self-interest or thinking we might get something in return, but just because it seems like the right thing to do. It may be something as simple as offering people a shoulder to cry on when they're in pain, or helping someone cross the street, or it may involve long-term commitment, like sitting by the bedside of someone who's ill or dying. We've all heard, too, of extreme instances in which someone, without ever thinking about the risk of his or her own life, jumps into a river to save a stranger who is drowning. Capability often manifests in a way in which we survive difficult events. For example, a long-term Buddhist practitioner I met recently had invested heavily in the stock market back in the 1990s, and when the market fell later in the decade, he lost everything. Many of his friends and partners had also lost a great deal of money, and some of them went a little crazy. Some lost confidence in themselves and their ability to make decisions. Some fell into deep depression. Others, like the people who lost money during the stock market crash of 1929, jumped out of windows. But he didn't lose his mind or his confidence or fall into depression. Slowly, he began investing again and built up new, solid financial base. Seeing his apparent calm in the face of such terrific downturn of events, a number of friends and associates asked him how he was able to retain his equanimity. Well, he replied, I got all this money from the stock market, and then it went back to the stock market, and now it's coming back to me. Conditions change, and I'm still here. I can make decisions. So maybe I was living in a big house one year and sleeping on a friend's couch the next. That doesn't change the fact that I can choose how to think about myself and all the stuff that's happening around me. I consider myself very fortunate, in fact. Some people aren't capable of choosing, and some people don't recognize that they can choose. I guess I'm lucky because I fall into the category of people who are able to recognize their capacity for choice. I've heard similar remarks from people who are coping with chronic illness, either in themselves, their parents, their children, or other family members or friends. One man I met recently in North America, for instance, spoke at length about maintaining his job and his relationship with his wife and children while continuing to visit his father, who was suffering from Alzheimer's. Of course, it's hard to balance all these things, he said, but it's what I do. I don't see any other way. Such a simple statement, but how refreshing. Though he'd never attended a Buddhist teaching before, he never studied the literature and didn't necessarily identify himself as a Buddhist, his description of his life and the way he approached it represented a spontaneous expression of all three aspects of Buddha nature: the wisdom to see the depth and breadth of his situation, the capability to choose how to interpret and act on what he saw, and the spontaneous attitude of loving kindness and compassion. As I listened to him, it occurred to me that these three characteristics of Buddha nature can be summed up in a single word: courage. Specifically, the courage to be. Just as we are, right here, right now, with all of our doubts and uncertainties. Facing experience directly opens us up to the possibility of recognizing that whatever we experience, love, loneliness, hate, jealousy, joy, greed, grief, and so on, is, in essence, an expression of the fundamentally unlimited potential of our Buddha nature. This principle is implied in the positive prognosis of the Third Noble Truth. Whatever discomfort we feel, subtle, intense, or somewhere in between, subsides to the degree that we cut through our own fixation upon a very limited, conditioned, and conditional view of ourselves and begin to identify with the capability to experience anything at all. Eventually, it's possible to come to rest in Buddha nature itself, the way, for instance, a bird might rest coming home to its nest. In that moment, suffering ends. There is nothing to fear, nothing to resist. Not even death can trouble you. This point was driven home very clearly to me as I sat with my father during the final days and hours of his life. I was 21 years old at the time, and my father was 76. He was a great meditator who spent his entire life deepening his recognition of the immensity of the mind and the transience of perception as he had been taught, and passing his understanding along to thousands of students from all around the world. Scores of people came to visit him during the final days of his life: monks, nuns, family members, other teachers, former students, ordinary people from surrounding villages. Sometimes he would sit up to meet them, and other times he would have to lie down. To every visitor, he offered a gentle smile and softly murmured, "Thank you." There was no trace of fear in his features, no evidence of struggle in his thin frame. The only sign that he was undergoing any extreme transition, the only sign that he was undergoing an extraordinary transition was the expression of mild curiosity that sometimes crossed his face, and of course, the quiet finality with which he thanked every and each visitor, as if to say they had been his teachers rather than the other way around. In the final few moments of his life, he felt an urge to urinate. Because the bathroom was far down the hall, there was a portable sort of toilet in his room, and someone brought it to him, and he began to stand up from his bed. "Maybe you'd better just lay down," one of the brothers suggested. "We can put this thing under you." "No, no," he laughed, waving their concerns aside. When he'd finished, he sat back on his bed in the meditative posture. Legs crossed, spine straight, hands resting comfortably in his lap, eyes focused straight ahead. Very gradually, his breathing slowed and finally stopped. We didn't realize that he died for several moments. He remained in the meditative posture, which in Tibetan is known as tukdam, which could roughly be understood as death meditation, a process of consciously experiencing the separation of consciousness from the physical body. For 3 days before his body began to slump. During that period, his body wasn't stiff with rigor mortis, his complexion remained bright pink and even slightly radiant. I can well understand that these are conditions that many people in the modern world would find difficult to believe. I'd find them hard to believe if I hadn't witnessed them for myself. And I was raised in a tradition in which it is considered possible that a person can experience death in full conscious and equanimity. But the signs were there. My father died with full awareness, looking calmly at what most people considered the most dire of sufferings as a luminous experience of his Buddha nature. Buddha moments. Most of us don't recognize our Buddha nature until it's pointed out to us. Not long ago, I heard a story about a man in India who was given an expensive watch. Having no experience what a watch is or does, he thought of it as nothing more than a pretty bracelet. He had no idea that it was an instrument that told time. Consequently, he always was late for work and was ultimately fired from his job and lost his home. Although he had made appointments with various prospective employers, he was either too late or too early for the interview. Finally, out of frustration, he asked a man on the street, "Can you tell me what time it is?" The man looked at him in surprise. "You're wearing a watch," he said. "That will tell you what time it is." "A watch?" the fellow replied. "What's that?" "You're kidding, right?" The stranger pointed to the instrument the guy was wearing on his wrist. No, the man answered. "This thing is a nice piece of jewelry. It was given to me by a friend. What does it have to do with knowing what time it is?" So, exhibiting a good deal of patience, the stranger on the street taught the man how to read the hour and the minute hand on his watch, and even the swiftly moving hand that swept over the seconds. "I can't believe this," the fellow explained. "Do you mean to say that I've always had something that could tell me the time and I never knew it?" "Don't blame me," the stranger said. "Whoever gave it to you should have explained what it is." After a moment, the man replied in quiet, embarrassed voice, "Well, maybe he didn't know what it was either." "Be that as it may," the stranger replied, "he gave you a gift that you didn't know how to use. Now at least you know how to use it." And with that, he disappeared in a swirl of pedestrians, beggars, cars, and rickshaws that crowded the streets of India. Who knows whether this fellow was a Buddha or just a random stranger encountered by chance who happened to know the difference between a watch and a bracelet. In any case, the man was able to make use of the watch, show up on time for interviews, eventually get a good job, and reestablish his life. The lesson I learned from this story is that we're endowed with capabilities that we frequently fail to recognize until they're pointed out to us. These reminders are what I like to call Buddha moments, opportunities to wake up, so to speak, from the dream of conditioned awareness. I experienced one such Buddha moment during my first teaching tour in California, when people urged me to swim as a form of exercise. I didn't want to go, but my host had already set up an appointment at a local club, which was outfitted with an Olympic-sized pool. I jumped in and was immediately a success at swimming underwater, which is to say I sank like a stone. I kept trying to push myself along underwater, but I couldn't last for more than a minute. My arms and legs got tired and I couldn't hold my breath. Okay, I figured, you're being too tense. Try to accomplish something. So I let my muscles relax completely, floated up to the surface, and again was successful at sinking. Then I remembered something. As a child, I used to swim in the small pond near my home. It was not very deep, and my swimming style wasn't exactly what you'd call elegant, just flapping along, dog paddling. The people who brought me to the club were amazed. One minute you were sinking, they said, and the next minute you were swimming. How'd you do that? I remembered, I answered. For a few moments, I was confused by the size of the pool. Then I remembered I could swim. This experience is similar, perhaps on a small scale, to the recollection of the power and potential of Buddha nature. Deep within us lies the capacity of boundless wisdom, capability, and compassion. We tend not to remember our ability until we're thrust into a sink or swim situation. Seeing the good. In talking with many psychologists during my travels, I've learned of an interesting quirk of human nature. If we have 10 qualities, 9 of them positive and 1 of them negative, most people will tend to focus almost exclusively on the 1 negative quality and forget about the 9 positive ones. I saw this for myself not long ago when I received a late-night phone call from a friend of mine who is a rather popular performer. She was in Europe at the time and had just returned to her hotel room after appearing before thousands of enthusiastic fans. Imagine appearing in front of many people and hearing them shout how much they love you and how wonderful you are. After the concert, she returned to her hotel room to work on her laptop. Unfortunately, the battery was dead and she didn't have the proper adapter to plug it in and recharge her computer. She called the front desk for assistance. They promised to come up right away. Minutes passed, no one showed up, and she started to get rather upset. All sorts of feelings emerged: anger, resentment, loneliness over not being able to connect with the outside world through email or the internet. Finally, she called me. I was teaching in Paris at the time and asked, "What can I do?" Just appearing on a sidewalk makes thousands of people happy, but alone in my hotel room, I'm miserable. This stupid little problem with my computer has ruined my night. We talked for a bit about accepting impermanence and the challenge of fixating on relative reality. I remember telling her, "You tried your best to do something about your computer, but if the problem isn't solved as quickly as you want it to be, you can use the frustration and anger you feel as a focus of meditation. Don't run from those feelings. Don't try to shove them away. Look at them directly. If you do that, you might be able to see the awareness that enables you to be conscious of these feelings. If you can even touch that awareness, you'll start to see the problem that you're experiencing now in context of all the good qualities you have. Your talent, for example, the capability of giving joy to thousands of people. There is so much good in you and so much that is good about your life. Why let one difficult situation blind you to all the positive things you can bring to the world?" We talked a little bit until she calmed down and realized that one unfortunate incident didn't really have to ruin her night and that it didn't undermine her capability to bring joy to other people. "I feel better just talking to you," she said. "Thanks for reminding me that one little problem won't ruin my life." After I hung up the phone, I thought a bit about our conversation. Moments later, I realized what I had wanted to say but hadn't had the time to formulate a complete idea. Wisdom, capability, loving kindness, and compassion are what we're born with. Frustration, jealousy, guilt, shame, anxiety, greed, competitiveness, and so on are experiences we learn, often through the influence of our culture, our families, and our friends, and reinforced by personal experience. The positive prognosis of the third noble truth is that the limited or limiting ideas we hold about ourselves, others, and every other experience can be unlearned. Thank you for joining me today. Go out there and spread some kindness. Love yourself.